It is November 3rd, 2013. My name is David Quick. I'm interviewing James Pittman for the DC Gardeners Oral History Project, which is a project of the DC Humanities Council and the Neighborhood Farm Initiative. Jim, may I call you Jim? Is that what they call you?
Well, when in the workforce, I was called Jim, but at home, and my close friends and relatives called me James.
May I call you James?
Yes.
Okay, that's
fine.
what I will call you. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Could we have you start by just saying your name and your address?
My name is James E. Pittman. My address is 2263 Sudbury Road, Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20012.
Okay. And, of course, we're going to talk a lot about gardening and things like that. But to begin with, can you just talk a little bit about your early life, where you grew up, your family, the neighborhood, things like that?
Well, I really grew up in Washington, D.C. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, but at age 8, my family relocated here to Washington, D.C., in northeast Washington on Quincy Place, just north of Flood Avenue in an area called Truxton Circle or Eckington, whichever you prefer. My childhood was spent just the usual things in elementary school at Cook, and then one day at Bundy, and then 6th grade up at Monroe, and junior high school at Banneker, and on to Dunbar High School, where I finished Dunbar, and then 5 years at Howard University, and then following that, I spent 5 years in the military.
Okay.
So my life experience and community has been substantially Washington, even though with my military service I was able to travel to Europe, and since that time I have a taste for travel. I love to travel and go places and do things. And in fact, I went to the 7 Olympics, and usually as a part of that I would extend my tours or go in advance for activities. And I love to travel, and I learned that travel is quite educational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When your family moved up here from Arkansas, what brought them here? What made that move happen?
Well, at that time, my mother was having some difficulties with my dad, who was having some problems in the aftermath of the Depression and business-wise, and so that was some fractures in the family. And I moved here with she had a sister here who was rather successful and in real estate and like the matriarch of the family. And my mother brought me along with my 4 other siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, to Washington. And this is where we ended up. And not too many years later, my father died, and so this was our home and residence ongoing.
Yeah. Had your family been in Arkansas in the South mostly prior to that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, my mother's family was from Little Rock and from Georgia. My father's family had been from Ardmore, Oklahoma, and Little Rock. And as I understand it, it might have come off at the plantations of Louisiana following the Civil War, and with the migration of the, I guess, Kansas and Oklahoma area, that's where they ended up in a town called Ardmore, which had a relatively large black population. Yeah.
Okay. So growing up, did your family grow their own food much or do much gardening? Was that part of your family's life?
Hardly any.
Okay.
To my recollection, no, we did not. We became quite urban in that respect, and I can't ever recall our growing gardens, even in the war years. When the idea of these, gardening, came into fore.
Like victory gardens?
Victory gardens, they were called. That's right. As I recall, we didn't participate in any of those.
Okay. So when you came, you said you were 8 years old, so this was the early 40s when you moved to Washington.
Well, we arrived, I recall the day, it was a Saturday, it was October 10. I know the day because that Monday we went to school. It was Columbus Day. And Columbus Day, I don't recall being aware of Christopher Columbus, except I lived in an Italian neighborhood, so you can imagine Cristoforo Colombo was a very popular name in the activities in the Italian neighborhood. Even though the schools were segregated, the neighborhood was not, mine at least.
In Eckington, in Truxton Circle?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. It was Little Italy in that area, by and
Huh.
large, where I grew up. And no, we didn't garden.
Yeah.
But I remember the day, because that Monday, as I say, was Columbus Day.
Huh.
And it was quite an awakening for me, because coming from Little Rock, where the houses were all freestanding, they land around, and they did do gardening, as a matter of fact, but don't recall my family having done that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you do remember people gardening?
Oh yes,
there?
I do remember people gardening in Little Rock.
In Little Rock,
in
yeah.
Little Rock, but I don't recall gardening in D.C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? So you said that was an Italian neighborhood. There were a lot of Italian American people. What else do you remember about that part of D.C.? So that's kind of near Shaw and a lot south of New York Avenue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
What was it? I mean, what else do you remember about that?
Well,
in the
it was
40s and 50s.
Well, again, it was just a few months before the war started.
Mm-hmm.
And when the war started, things really changed to a great degree. I do recall growing up that a lot of people moved to D.C. as a part of the war effort in order to, I guess, support the federal government and the like. And I do recall as well many people going off to war. My oldest brother went off in the Navy. And wearing the uniform and being patriotic and all of those things, and buying the stamps, for the war bonds was a part of your life and style.
Yeah.
So that was much a part of what we participated in as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall rationing,
Mm-hmm.
which was on the books, but a lot of things went on off the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The underground market and things
Well,
like that.
I lived 2 doors from the Delicatessen.
Okay.
And Chris Delicatessen, I ended up working there at age 9 until I finished high school and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
But you're always aware that that was the way things were supposed to be, according to the laws and regulations. And of course, he was a bookie.
Yeah.
And the type of people that came in and around there, even policemen and firemen and the like, you learn how things worked and how they were supposed to work.
Yeah. What was the name of the deli?
Chris Delicatessen on the corner of Lincoln Road and Quincy Place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it still there? No.
No. It's been turned into a residence now. It is a residence now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were working pretty early.
At age 9,
Mm-hmm.
I recall getting a job.
Yeah.
Working there at the Delicatessen there on evenings and weekends and the mornings before I went off to school. I'd go over and help set up, stoke up the coal stove and move the soda bottles up and out if they need to be for deliverment, and taking in the milk and bread and things like that.
Yeah. So working in a deli, what else do you remember about what kind of food you ate growing up? What do you remember about food in those days in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I remember hamburgers, and of course I remember chicken and fish. At that time, there were these wagons that came along the streets that sold, fish. And the wagons came along and sold fresh vegetables as well.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them were horse-drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And there were horse troughs just a short block away. There's one in the 100 block of R Street, in the unit block of R Street. And there was one down on Florida Avenue between First and where R Street came at an angle there before it got to Second Street. These are water for the horses to line up and get their water.
Ooh, there's an automatic light.
Yeah.
We're okay. Okay.
So those are some of the things. It was an interesting time growing up in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
and because of the war and because of just a new era to me. I didn't know people lived that close together coming from Little Rock, Arkansas, and
Mm-hmm.
that was rather shocking that people lived so close together. It's a good thing I didn't experience New York or Chicago or someplace like that. Yeah.
Was that stressful?
It was different. I don't say it was stressful, but
Yeah. Did you miss being in a more rural place?
Not really. No, I lived in the city.
In Little Rock,
Little Rock,
of
yeah,
course.
I lived in the
course.
city. Yeah, I lived in the city. In fact, my mother's father had been, he was a pretty prominent man in Little Rock.
Okay.
He and his brother and others had formed worked for a group called the Mosaic Templars of America,
Okay.
which was one of the self-help type of operations. This one was focused on blacks, African Americans, Negroes, as we called them ourselves at that time. And they had a building, about a 5 or 6 story building, and supported black businesses, had insurance and burial society and nursing home care.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my mother's stepmother, I always have a stepmother, had taken over this nursing component of that when they disbanded, I guess, sometime in the 30s, because of the Depression. They were having difficulty. At one time, they were in 22 states and 7 foreign countries.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty successful self-help, and that site and location now is I think it's like a community center or a community historical educational society and center there.
Okay.
That puts on programs and meetings, to I guess to foster and to preserve the history and culture of Little Rock and the African Americans who were there.
Yeah. Do you still go there? Do you have family there still?
I have a few family there. I guess I've been there maybe 7, 8 times since I left. The first time I went back was when I was in the workforce. I went there following a meeting in Tuskegee, not in Tuskegee, but in Tennessee, and I went through there just to visit. I'd never been there. I guess it was well into my 40s or so at that time. Since I'd been back 3 or 4 times, passing through, going on to site visits to community mental health centers, and been back for 3 or 4 funerals, family funerals, and just this past summer we had our family reunion there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I was instrumental. Just I guess it was the year 2000 when people thought they were going to leave this earth.
Mm-hmm.
There seemed to be more consciousness about who you are and who you're with and your family. So we started our family reunion at that time, and since it's become a tradition, every 2 years we get together. We've always wanted to go back to Little Rock, and last summer was the first time we really did.
Okay.
Always held in this area in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
You came up here with your mother. What kind of did she have a career here in Washington? What did she do?
She did. Unfortunately, it was well, when she first came, she had 5 children.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt was a school teacher,
Mm.
and she had a lot of contacts. And in fact, we stayed in a house my aunt owned. My aunt had about 7, 8 houses, and we rented from my aunt, for many, many years. And my mother, as I recall, she first started working in a hospital, emptying bedpans and the like,
Mm-hmm.
and subsequently started work as a clerk in the federal government, and that's the career she had, was a clerical clerk. And even though she had spent 1 year in college,
Mhm.
she had spent 1 year at Spelman College.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather, her father, by the way, he apparently had a lot of contacts, influence, and obviously some money as well. All of his children, his 7 children, had the opportunity to go to college. They all didn't finish, but they all went to college.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, after 1 year at Spelman, decided to come home and get married.
Okay.
That's what she did.
Yeah. So federal career, that's
Mhm.
not a bad path forward in Washington, D.C.
No, that's the industry in this town. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you went to high school at Dunbar,
Yes.
an important historical high school here in Washington,
Very
D.C.
significant, important high
Yeah.
school. Yes.
Talk about going to Dunbar High. What was this? Is
Well,
it the
first I must tell you, I'm
Okay.
chairman of the Dunbar Alumni Federation.
Yes.
Which is a umbrella organization for all the Dunbar alumni classes and alumni, and so I've been very much involved with trying to preserve that history, and that's secondary, of course, to our primary concern and interest is in scholarship and other support for the students in the school and the faculty and their various activities there. So I'm very much involved in that. But attending Dunbar was quite interesting for me. You know, my family was not that well connected with Dunbar. It was well known at the time to be I guess the farm team for many of the Ivy League schools, for some of the folks, and also a feeder for Howard and for Minor Teachers College. And we expected to be sufficiently trained and that you could hold your own, you know, at those levels. And it was true.
Yeah.
I learned, and even though I did not have the contacts to participate with some of my classmates, because I was not, you know, of a professional family and things like that. I knew other people had greater advantages than I did. But while there, you know, I was not one of the scholastic stars, but I held my own. And I was with the junior ROTC, which was very prominent in the high schools, all the high schools in D.C. at that time. And I was the adjutant in my senior year, which was one of the top positions, you know, and we won the competition among the high schools that year. Academically, I was okay. I was good.
Yeah.
Athletically, I participated on the track team. I threw the javelin. Didn't run, even though I always thought I could run. I knew I could run, but I never competed in running. And I usually won a medal here and there.
Yeah.
But when I got to college, I didn't grow as much as some other people. So my competition was not that stellar at the college level.
So you talked about being aware of students at Dunbar who were connected or something like that. So was that part of the culture of Dunbar, that there was a a network?
There was, you know, it was very obvious, you know, to some folks, you know, they had these networks, you know, going to parties and these various groups and that and the other, you know. At the same time, you know, you did have opportunity to get involved in other things. I was my last year, I was the editor-in-chief of our school newspaper, which had a lot of awards and the like, you know, the Quill and Scroll. And we used to write for, as I recall, it's the Daily News. They had a section on Saturdays on high school sports. I used to do a little writing for that, and we had a radio show. I don't recall, it was Friday night or Saturday morning on one of the local radio shows, you know, about high school sports as well. So I did get exposed to things like that because of my interest and availability for that. And I think it's because my English teacher, who also my homeless teacher, saw something in me, and that he put me in that position, allowed me to get in the position as editor-in-chief of the school newspaper.
Nice.
And and he's, of course, looking back, I always say he was my favorite teacher because of that. You know. He ended up, his name was Tignor. He ended up being the principal over at Spingarn.
Okay.
So.
Over off Bladensburg Road? Is that?
Yes. It's off of it's off of
Benning Road.
Yeah.
So at that time, I mean, Dunbar was an all African American school at that time.
Yeah.
So were the public schools different then in terms of where you went? I mean, was it?
Yes, they were. Typically, Dunbar was a college preparatory school.
Yeah. And,
you know, some of my classmates, you know, got scholarships to Yale and Harvard and Wesleyan and to other Ivy League schools. I don't know anyone in my class went to one of the military academies, but they often did in that era. A fellow Wesley Brown, about 5-6 years ahead of me, was the first to graduate from the Naval Academy.
Okay.
And about 3 years ahead of me, there were some folks that went to the West Point and the like.
Yeah.
But in my era, you know, interestingly, you know, coming on at that time, of course, you know, the war, the military was one of the highest things. Many of the folks along me achieved very high rank, you know. one of my classmates named Chambers, I think he was maybe a colonel, lieutenant, maybe a major, but his brothers, he had two brothers. One was a 2-star admiral, the other one was a 3-star general. They both acted at the same time, which is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, most unusual. One had attended Naval Academy, but the other brother was a 3-star general. He was a Howard with me, 1 year ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Andrew Chambers. And it was clear that Dunbar prepared you to compete on any level academically, and I saw that in people who had gone before me, and I saw it at Howard, and I saw it, occasionally I took a summer course at AU, a place like that, we were able to compete at any level.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, you felt good about what Dunbar had done in preparing you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what were you, so you talked about writing and some radio. What were you looking ahead towards? What were you thinking about in terms of where your life was
initially,
going?
I was pre-med.
Okay.
Yeah, I took courses at Howard, in chemistry and biology, a zoology major, and in chemistry major, I think it was. And again, I wasn't still a student there, but I managed, and I recall when I took the medical aptitude examination, and I didn't set the curve, but apparently I was sufficiently in the mix that I didn't apply
to medical school.
Medical school immediately.
Okay.
My uncle had an uncle by marriage who was on the faculty. They taught pharmacology, and he asked me why I didn't. I just told him I didn't think I was ready.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting point in my life and career, in as much as what I did, I went on the next year. I started taking a course in bacteriology, thinking I was going to get a master's or maybe prepare psychologically, to go to medical school. Somehow or another, I forgot you have to have 12 semester hours to maintain your draft deferment.
Oh.
And I was only taking 9. And
so what year
that was
is this?
1956.
Okay.
And so I was drafted.
So the draft is still
Oh yes, the draft was
in effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was drafted.
Okay.
A couple of months. In fact, it was before Thanksgiving. I got my notice to get 30 days out, so I don't think I'd been in school for a month or so, and I was working part-time at that time at the post office.
Mm-hmm.
Someone came across the phone to me and said, "You're going to get greetings from Uncle Sam tomorrow." And sure enough, I did. But it was standard at that time. You knew or prepared yourself. You're going to spend at least 2 or more years in the military if you were physically fit.
Yeah.
And not married and had a lot of kids.
Yeah.
You built that into part of your life and your career. So it didn't shock me so much, except it wasn't the time I would have selected for it.
So you said it was you had been in school a month, like of your freshman year, or
No. This was after after I'd finished up my courses, to get graduation. Actually, I got my degree was I got the courses work over the summer.
Yeah.
But in that fall, I enrolled in graduate school.
Oh, I see.
And I was taking courses in bacteriology.
So you had your bachelor's degree. You were done with undergrad.
Actually, I had the courses. They wasn't conferred until next year at Howard at that time. They only conferred it in the May-June period. Yeah.
But it sounded like that wasn't your plan for that year. I mean,
my plan was to go on and to graduate school, maybe get a course in bacteriology, and really see if I was prepared mentally and all the other things to go to medical school. Mm-hmm. And I was not taking sufficient number of credit hours to maintain my my deferment.
Yeah.
So I was called.
Yeah.
Called. Yeah.
So you got drafted. Do you remember? I want to hear a little bit about your military service, but do you remember? Again, we're just interested in kind of food and food culture over history. Are there any other memories you have of just where food came from, or restaurants that you ate at, or learning to cook? It sounds like you still aren't a gardener yet.
No.
Up to this point.
Well, actually, in college, most of the guys I associated with were from out of town.
Mm-hmm.
and many of them were quite poor, and often they'd come home with me to eat. Somehow or another, my mother could magically make all this food appear. And often I'd spend days or weeks up in the dormitories, crashing, as they call it, and these guys get hungry, they'd come home with me. And my mother would make all this food and satisfy them, and some of these guys, turned out to be quite successful. One fellow, military retiree, one of my closest friends, my fraternity brothers, they both remember, he was from Little Rock, Arkansas, attended Dunbar Little Rock, so we had a special connection for that reason, and my family knew his family from Little Rock. His name is Bobby Works. He retired as a colonel, lives in this area now. Another person who prominently involved in coming home with me was someone named John Jacob. Jacob was poor from he was from Houston, Texas, at Howard. And Jake, he ended up being the president of the National Herbal League, and also vice president of Anheuser-Busch. Jake is a millionaire many times over now, and he has a big condo down in Florida and one out here in Bethesda, because he has a granddaughter in this area. But the food was, my mother prepared it, and my sisters prepared it, to help her, especially when all these guys would come on with me to eat. And, of course, I always had access to the food at the corner Delicatessen. But another thing I failed to mention, while in college, at least for 2 or more years, I worked part-time down at the O Street Market. Actually, right next to the O Street Market was a place called Carolina Market. And I worked for the Goodmans there, and I usually would go in there and stock in the mornings and right up 7th Street and George Avenue to Howard University. And then I worked there maybe on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, peak hours, etc. And of course, I knew about all the foods, the fresh fruits and vegetables coming through there, and so I could get that at a discount. Not take it home to my mother,
Yeah.
So yes, I was aware of at least that part of the food, chain and where it come from. And,
Yeah.
Yes.
What kind of food did your mom cook?
Mostly Southern style. Greens and beans and chicken and beef. Well,
Yeah.
she loved beef, steak. And I don't particularly like steak. I don't know why. I can do without steak, but I like roast.
Yeah.
Like chuck roast and those type of roasts you slow cook and I like.
Have you learned how to cook at all?
Not really. I think I can. In fact, my wife was in Los Angeles this past week celebrating the 80th birthday of a friend of hers. And last Sunday I had some need a feeling for pot roast. And I remember that Giant had this boneless chuck on sale. I stopped by and got that and looked up the recipe and came home and cooked it.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
And my wife said it was good. She had 2 meals out. She said, I want you to cook that again. Occasionally, I cook one pot meal. The one I don't do it much, but I often cook 2 or 3 times a year, no more than 2, more than 3. Brunswick stew, which is, like a hunter's stew. You put everything in there, and chicken and beef and smoked shoulder or smoked ham and whatever, and potatoes and okra and
whatever is on hand.
Yeah, you have to throw everything in there. Yeah, it's good.
Nice.
Good and wholesome.
Yeah. So you're mentioning kind of a certain kind of food market that isn't as prevalent in D.C. anymore, like the O Street Market.
Yeah. Well, you have the Eastern Market,
Yeah.
and you also have the market out there at 5th and Florida Avenue.
Union Market.
Union Market, yeah,
which they've redone
Yeah,
significantly.
Right, yeah.
But you also mentioned, kind of horse-drawn food carts that used to exist here. By the mid-'50s, when you're kind of finishing college, has that changed significantly? That kind of
It began to change quite a bit, but some of the other things still existed. In fact, the markets were still very, very functioning operation like that time.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mentioned Eastern Market. I worked at the corner store, and as I mentioned, the characters in there. One of the guys lived down the street, named Tony. Tony's family had a couple of stands down at the Eastern Market, the old Eastern Market. But Tony he was big fat Tony. He couldn't stand very long on his feet.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony made his living by playing cards and gambling. There was a place called Jimmy LaFontaine out on the border of PG County and D.C., where often Tony would occasionally go out there and make a big hit in terms of winnings. And you always knew when he had a big win because he'd buy a new Cadillac. Capitol Cadillac then was down on New York Avenue and North Capitol Street.
Mm-hmm.
And they come and park this Cadillac right there on Lincoln Road in Quincy Place. Until Tony lost. Tony didn't drive either. But that was part of the show of it, you know. And when he lost his money, then they'd take the car back.
Uh-huh.
It'd sell it back to them.
That's funny. So was he well known in D.C. as a?
Well, at least in that area. Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny. So you get out of Howard. You're thinking grad school, but you get drafted.
Yeah.
What branch were you drafted into?
U.S. Army. I
All
went
right.
down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and what a culture shock that was.
Okay.
First, this is before Thanksgiving too, which made it even more, you know, you don't think the people are treated the way you are when you go into service. The group of us were to go out of National Airport on an airplane. But for whatever reason, we got out to the tarmac, you know, and getting ready to take off, and they had some mechanical problems. And then because of that, we were delayed, and we were rescheduled, you know, on the flight. And they delayed the flight. So we got in there, in the barracks, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. These guys come up in the dark, you know, with these helmets screaming and hollering at you, and
Drill sergeants. And,
yes, indeed, and gave us our bunks and things like that, and said that when you we're going to get up reveillees at 6 o'clock. I said, we only get about 2 hours of sleep. I said, well, they wouldn't do that, you know, but we did.
Yeah.
And of course, going on to Fort Jackson, and your first experience when you go to the chow hall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it was the first or second day down there, you know, they had these big signs that take all you want, but eat all you take.
Eat what you take, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, I was a strapping 21 or 22-year-old. I could eat a lot. And of course, you see all these bacon and eggs and sausage and things like that. So I filled up. And the eggs, when I got back to eat them, the odor of them, they were processed, you know, they were dried eggs, and they smelled horrible. Some cooks can cook those well and do well with them. These things, they got close to my mouth, and it almost made me throw up.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, what am I going to do with these eggs? And I had a thing about 3 or 4 half pints of milk. So I drank the milk and put the eggs in there. But at Fort Jackson, I don't know, 300 or 400 guys in my training unit down there. I was tops in my class.
Uh-huh.
Because I'd had the military and junior ROTC.
Did you do ROTC in Howard also?
I did it for 2 years.
Okay.
I was in Air Force, but what had happened when I got there, I didn't finish. For 2, well, one, that was the year they introduced this very difficult manual. They later changed it after about 2 more years because they realized it was too advanced.
Yeah.
So I think I got a C or C minus or something like that in Air Force ROTC, which meant practically I wasn't going to be commissioned.
Mm-hmm.
So I dropped ROTC. But based on my knowledge, that's mostly from high school, and I was tops in my training cycle down there.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother and my sister came down for the graduation, and I'm standing up there at the reviewing stands when they pass and review in front of you. So that was quite honor and recognition. But even then, though, I recall my mother, and even though when they got to the post, you know, we were driven around, chauffeured around and everything for the 2 days or so that they were there. The trains at that time, they may not. I think it was after they presumably had been desegregated, but they tried to enforce it down there. And I recall coming home on weekends, you know, after we finished most of the early part of basic training, if you were like the colonel's orderly, that is, you in learning all of the military information, etc., you had a weekend pass. Because I always won that because, again, because of my background and experience. And I would come on with the fellow. We'd take the same train, but he'd go to Philadelphia. His name was William Pollan.
Yeah.
And down there, they had the colored and they had the white section, the same, different ends and everything. We always walk in where we wanted to. But that was one of the things that was very obvious in it down there at that time. William Pollan, the nephew of Abe Pollan, who owned the Wizards and built the arena here. That was part of that family.
Yeah. I mean, in going from JROTC all the way into the military, you would have, that would have bridged the military being desegregated, right? I mean,
yes, that was afterwards.
Right, by the time you're in the Army, it's desegregated, but,
right.
You were already doing JROTC when it was still segregated, right? Or
no, 51, actually 49, I guess that was the time they were really moving into the phasing in of the desegregated military,
Yeah. I mean, by the time you were there in Fort Jackson, it was fully
integrated.
integrated.
Fully integrated,
yeah.
So sure it was,
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what, you were in the Army for 2 years?
5 years, 2 months, and 22 days.
Okay, you re-upped.
No, I didn't re-up.
Oh.
I enlisted.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
I was a draftee.
Yes.
So I would have gotten out in 18 to 24 months.
Right.
I met this Fräulein.
Yes.
who's been married to for 53 years by now. I've known her 55 years, I guess, by now. So based on having met her, I was going to accomplish two things. One, there was a lot of resistance to marrying, foreign nationals, and they put all kinds of obstacles in your way, and you had to go through a lot of hoops, paperwork, and she had to go through a lot of paperwork and all of that. And it took a total of 18 months. Well, I knew it took a long time from the knowledge I had. So I enlisted. And the enlistment was before my 2 years was up. I enlisted with the understanding that I was going to be allowed to come back to GW.
Okay.
And I got my admission to GW to study bacteriology for 2 years, detached from Walter Reed, and I would have been commissioned afterwards as a sanitation officer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that thing went pretty well up until they started building the Berlin Wall. So everything was dropped, like, the guys who've been called up from the reserves and the National Guard and things like that. And so all those programs like that were canceled.
Mm.
And I was sent to Fort Riley, Kansas, the Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I ended up. But while over there in Germany, that was great duty, by the way,
and you went there shortly after you were done
basic training.
With basic training. You went to Germany.
Went to Germany. I tried to stay here in the States, think I'd been able to hook up with my girlfriend and everything, but that didn't pan out. And got sent to Germany. Mm. And that was quite a culture shock, too. But
yeah.
You learned to adjust, and I'll tell you, that was the best thing that happened to me as well.
Yeah.
Getting there in Germany. And I was not in a line unit, like the armor or the infantry. I was in my unit was 102nd Signal. We had 57 sites in Germany and France, the long-distance telephone system we ran. And after France, the Air Force picked it up in Spain. And we needed these communications, especially since the tension between us and the Soviets was pretty high all the time I was there. And we had missile sites in Turkey, and we had missile sites in Italy at the time. And we'd have these drills once a month, escape an invasion in case you had, strayed across the border or something happened to you, etc. And always, society says, you're supposed to act like you were indigenous. I said, that's not going to work for me. I'm not going to fool anybody that I'm German. And shut up, Pittman, you have to stay like the rest of us,
Yeah.
it was good for me. I achieved the highest rank I could, E5.
Yeah.
And not only that, I received the Army Commendation Medal, which is the highest you can get in peacetime, except for heroism. And at that time, they weren't passing many out to enlisted men, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I had gone to the 7th Army NCO Academy, which is the tops NCO Academy in Bad Tölz, Germany. Came out tops in that class, too. And, you know, the monthly soldier thing, I won so many times, they gave me a plaque and said, you can no longer compete. Because I always came out tops, you know, in that type of competition, you know. Yeah. So, and working mostly 8 to 5 days a week.
Right.
Again, because I was a garrison soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in a suburb of Mannheim, 17 miles from Heidelberg. And it was a great duty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you met your future wife while you were there.
We went back last summer. I've been back many times. She used to go back every year, but we went back to even the little rat house, you know, the little town hall where we were married.
Uh-huh.
You
were married there in Germany?
Yeah, yes, we were married in Germany. Uh-huh. And my friend, I mentioned, the one who had attended high school with me, attended college with me, but went to high school in Little Rock, Dunbar. He was my best man. Mm. En route over there, of course, he stopped by to pay honor and tribute to my mother, and she said, you go over there and tell James not to marry that German girl. And of course, he came over, he was my best man.
Was your mother concerned about that?
Oh, sure. She's concerned about the interracial marriage and how it would be received, and the person stresses be on both of us, and things like that. But of course, my wife, after she met my mother said, you know, I was not in favor of your getting married. She said, but you won't find a better mother-in-law than me. My wife thinks more of her than she does of her deceased mother. She felt that her mother, she didn't know her mother that well, because she was unfortunately bombed out in some of the first raids over her town, Mannheim being an industrial town, and she was evacuated to a suburb. I ended up in the hills with these nuns taking care of her, and until the war was over. So she was born in 1937, so to about 45 or 46, she was rid by nuns. And her father was off in the military, was killed, and then her mother had to work, you know, in part of the defense activity as well. So, you know, and then afterwards, when her mother coming back and trying to get reestablished, she went away to school, to private schools with the nuns. So most of the year, in her early development and everything, she didn't spend that much time with her mother. So,
yeah. So you talked about your plan to get a degree at GW kind of being interrupted. Were you able to complete that? Or
no.
Okay.
No. Again, what happened was when the Berlin Wall was being built, all those type of things were dropped.
Yeah.
You know, we had to get ready for redeployment. I was assigned to Fort Riley, Kansas, which is an interesting place to go.
Yeah.
For me, in as much as my father and his folks had come from the plains, at least that generation in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And I'd never been in the plains before. That's an interesting place. I just remember my first 2 weeks down there before my wife arrived. I stayed on post. I'd hear this whistling noise at night. What's that? Well, that's the wind. The wind always blows. Oh, yes, the wind always does blow in the plains. So you get accustomed to when there's a major cold front coming out of Canada, it might take 2 or 3 hours to get there where you are.
Yeah.
The same with a heat wave coming up from the Gulf.
Yeah.
And things like that. And the lifestyle out there, you know, the hunting and the like, and you see a tree, you want to go up and hug it. There's so few around, you know. But we were preparing, we were really humping, as they refer to the military terms, you know, and training and preparation for redeployment back in Germany, in Europe. I was in the 28th Infantry. The other unit I remember, there were 4 or 5 battle groups, battalions in that. One was the 13th Infantry. They had battles in 13th Infantry, first in Vicksburg, so that shows the history of that unit. My unit was in the First World War, you know, in Italy, a place like so. Very storied companies, and of course you hear of the 1st Infantry over there in Iraq, you know, and they were active over there as well. But that was very interesting to get redeployed, and I had never soldiered like that since basic training.
Yeah.
And our preparation, I was extended on active duty because of that. You know, I recall in our preparation we had to. I was the information specialist for my battle group.
Okay.
And, you know, writing, you know, news releases and things like that, and interesting. So I had a lot of free reign. I had a photographer. My first experience down there, by the way. Soon after I arrived, I received the Army Commendation Medal, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And so they had to have a parade for me, and retreat, you know. And the colonel, all he was concerned about getting himself acknowledged. So
Yeah.
he wasn't too pleased that they had to have this parade and pass and review while I was awarded the Army Commendation Medal.
Yeah.
And he let it be known to me.
Uh,
And one of the things I learned to satisfy him, and because the true function of the information specialist is to make sure that the grunts and line soldiers get acknowledged back in their hometowns. Most of these guys from the Midwest, you know, all the way from up into the Dakotas or into Texas and that area, you know. So I'd write these news releases that they're there, you know, what they're doing and things like that. And he brought me up into his office one day and to dress me down, and he showed me the Post newspaper. He said, "You see this?" He said, "That's not an article in there about me." He said, "Your job is to make sure that monthly there's a piece in there about me or the operations of this 28th Infantry here in the 1st Infantry Division." Yes, sir. so I accommodated him, you know, in that regard.
Yeah.
But I was piss poor, you know, to use a graphic term.
yeah.
And because he was concerned about himself. Of course, he's trying to polish his brass, you know.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
And when we went out to our readiness preparation, the whole battle group, 1,500, it was supplemented by the armored unit from Texas. I forgot which one it was. We went into the Tarryall National Forest, the western slopes of the Rockies, you know, prepared before Thanksgiving. And that was quite an interesting experience, too. En route there, we stayed in the, we camped in the Hastings, Kansas, which is in western Kansas, the fairgrounds there. And I recall what a beautiful thing it is in the plains when the stars are out and you look out. You know, it's like being on the ocean. I've gone over troop ships 2 times. It's a beautiful sight to see. And those experiences you don't get that often unless you live out there. And
Right.
I was not from the plains area. But the next morning, snow was hitting me in the face. And by the time we ate, shaved, and got on the road, we encountered a blizzard before Thanksgiving. And we got to Colorado, and it was so heavy, we could not go up to a place where we were going to go through these training tests. So we had to go to Fort Carson overnight. And the next day, there was an advance party going up to set up, you know, for the colonel and all of that. And I went up part of the advance party, took my photographer, because the Rockies are beautiful.
Yeah.
It's spectacular. But being up there at night, then daytime is more nice and warm with the sun reflecting off the snow, but at night, it's brutal.
Yeah.
That night, and I think about 9 of us, we got into this Arctic tent. Somebody had an Arctic tent, and we had a 5-gallon can of diesel fuel, and we had to vote on how we're going to manage the night. Should we keep it on till it exhausts, or should we turn it off and open it up in the morning to get up to shave and get ready? And we all voted to turn it off. And I had a poncho on the ground, air mattress on top of that. I had a blanket on top of that. I had a sleeping bag and a blanket on top of that. And I'm only a black guy of these 9 guys, you know. But 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I just shook the rest of the night. it was 26 below zero up there. And that cold, just penetrated all of that stuff. And I couldn't sleep. Those guys were snoring and carrying
That's
on
funny.
with that. But we were up there 16 days over Thanksgiving. And I was able to get some photos and some stories out about the colonel that appeared in the Chicago Tribune. He's up there pointing his swagger stick up in the air and the planes flying over the head, But I could do no wrong after that, but I was, things subsided in Europe. I think they decided we weren't going to war about building the Berlin Wall, so I got out in February.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you return to Washington, D.C. at that point?
The first time the first chance I could, I came back home.
Okay.
Yeah. And I promised myself, as much as I like being outdoors, I'll never get a job working outside because of the harshness of that weather up there in the Rockies.
Yeah. So, and what kind of life did you set up?
I soon thereafter took the Federal Service Entrance Exam and a few other tests, to go get a government job, and I was qualified, for grade 5 and 7 positions along with a lot of others, so I ended up as a grade 5 in a management training program at NIH, and my background and pre-med and the like. One of the coincidences for you ironies is that after I'd been there, my first year, I was promoted every year on the day I came there, not waiting to the end of the pay cycle. I had a daughter, and my first of two daughters were born in July. This is 63. And I got a call from the secretary to Howard Medical School. He'd been in college, but he said, Jim Pittman, I heard you back in town. I remember you taking the MCAT. He said, this is in August. He said, do you want to take up a slot? We just came available for medical school.
Wow.
I had 3 days to make up my mind. That was just so shocking to me, and such a life change that would have made for me. I didn't make it. I couldn't make that change. My aunt, the one I told you was of good means, she said she'd pay for my, and also let me stay in her house. She had an apartment there.
Yeah.
So you and Heather and the baby, we can stay here with you, and I'll pay. Psychologically, I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't get myself ready for that, so I declined that offer. Yeah. But my life career wasn't that bad. I ended up in the senior executive service.
Yeah.
And executive officer at IMH for one period of time. Associate director, overseeing the transfer of St. Louis Hospital to the district government. So I did some significant, meaningful things in my career.
Yeah.
But I never went to medical school, even though I had a second chance.
Yeah. It sounds like that would have been a pretty big shift of...
3 days to make a decision
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Where in this do you start gardening?
Well, I lived in Riggs Park for about, I guess, 9 years or so. And after 8 or 9 years, when you're paying your mortgage and the like, that switch, you're paying much more in your taxes. So I said, we got to move into to another house. I lived in an apartment for a couple of years, and then we moved in a house. And then we decided to move over here in Colonial Village, and my comings and goings off and off Oregon Avenue, I noticed this community garden over there. So I finally got up, enough, I went over and talked and asked them about it. I had to get on a wait list. I think I had to wait a year. And that year, I did get a garden, so I joined over there. It was pretty highly organized, like various chores and tasks and groups meeting. And by that time, I'd also taken the course through UDC. It was for
the Master Gardener?
Master Gardener's course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had already been gardening in your house, or?
Not really. I'd have a lawn, and I'd maintain the lawn, but I maybe put a few things out back, but not real true gardening. In fact, I did do that for the first 2 years. I put some things on the fence line. I had tomatoes and maybe okra or peppers and things like that.
Yeah.
But then I got on board with the Rock Creek Community Garden.
So what inspired you to even want to take a Master Gardener class and join a community garden? I mean, was it something you had been thinking about?
I probably had been thinking about it, and also driving by there as often as I did. It looked like it's something I could be very comfortable with.
Okay.
I like to be outside somewhat, but not a job outside, as I mentioned earlier on. After that experience up in the Tarryall National Forest.
Right.
Yeah. So I eventually got on that, and it was the year, either the first year or the year after that, the Park Service used to run the programs there, and I think in other places, but they divested themselves of that and assigned it over to the community gardens at that time. And I was given the task of chairing the group to set up our operations and bylaws, and I did that this first year. So I've been there at least 30 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that when the National Park Service kind of handed over more of the management, that was early 80s. I've heard some people kind of can attribute that to kind of Reagan.
Yeah,
era.
it was part of the cutbacks. There was probably some reduction in funding. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they no longer could manage and be a part of it as they had been up to that point. So but they came around intermittently to inspect and to make sure you weren't violating and putting out the list of chemicals and other things you weren't supposed to use and the like.
How big was your plot?
My initial was the regular plot, 10 by 10.
Okay.
20 by 10, I guess it was.
Okay.
And I now have a double plot.
Mm-hmm.
I have two because I'm an old timer there. And it seems like, the interest sort of ebbs and flows. I have a double plot there now. And,
okay. And how many people were there at that time about?
I think it's about 127 plots, but you have several, I don't know how many double plots they have. So we have about 100 gardeners. You don't see them all. Some people come at odd times and the like, and some people sometimes they go in the daytimes, they go in the evenings, weekends and the like. Yeah. And it's very enjoyable to me in terms of getting out and meeting people of different races and ethnicities and cultures and the like, and the things they grow and garden. And at the end of the season, we try to have like a potluck type of thing.
Yeah.
I don't think we had it this year. At least I don't recall. I didn't make it because of other conflicts.
Yeah. What did you grow in those early days? I mean, what kind of things did you plant?
I tried to grow everything. You learn. I tried to grow potatoes out there, and I tried to grow kohlrabi and string beans and certain things you learn that don't grow well. You trial and error. That's what gardeners do. Different farmers do some of that too. But one of the things I learned, I don't grow potatoes anymore. Some people like Jim Proust grows potatoes.
Yeah.
But he's from England. The potatoes are very important. And my wife in Germany, they eat a lot of potatoes too. But the clay substructure here makes it very hard unless you're going to build it up. And I've been using leaves to build up my garden for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But still, certain things you have to be especially prepared for in the preparation for. And I tried potatoes a couple of years, but they were so difficult to dig out. And because of the hardness of the subsurface, they're sort of small. And the carrots, another thing I tried early on. But the taste of the carrots did not just appeal to me. I didn't try carrots for too many years.
Yeah.
For that reason. And kohlrabi, which is almost like a root plant too. But you learn, by trial and error, or what you're going to like to eat. And I typically now I tried a few things like that, trial and error, and I no longer eat them. Typically, I'll grow the standards, tomatoes. Bell peppers, California peppers. I'll grow a variety of other hot peppers, 2 or 3. and I always will grow eggplant, and the standard plus the Asian type, which are very nice to eat. I also grow string beans, but they're bush beans, and I do that because they usually come to fruit, ready for harvest over a 3 or 4 week period of time, and you can turn over that plot for fall garden. So that's what I typically do. I also grow a lot of okra. I guess I was the first person to introduce okra out in that garden out there. And I put in at least a fourth, sometimes a third of my garden in okra. My wife even likes okra, in soups and stews, or even frying it, steaming it mostly she likes. But my church members love okra. And I take a lot of okra and tomatoes and peppers to church. But now since I've grown okra out there, many of the other gardeners out there grow okra. And I often, when I have from seeds, I have, the transplants, I give them away and people use them to grow okra.
Do you make your own seedlings? Or
Not for okra, I don't. I occasionally make my own seeds. I don't think I've done that the last 3 years. Interesting, since I've been retired, I don't seem to have the time to do it.
That's funny.
Years ago, I did I grow from seed a lot of things.
Yeah. So you talked about meeting people from a lot of different backgrounds at the garden. What was the mix of people when you first started there?
A good many of them worked at NIH, interestingly. Even though I'd started NIH, my agency had moved out, separated from the NIH campus. We were out in Rockville, Park Lawn Drive, Fisher's Lane. NIH, and we had some people working with some of the World Bank, so you had some people out there from other countries and cultures, Asia and the like, and South America, Caribbean. And
then both white and black Washingtonians?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
I remember we had some folks out there from the African Embassy. And there was another guy out there who was from the group of Africans who set up their group here to oppose apartheid. This is before Mandela was released. And it was interesting. They were out there at the garden at the same time. And of course the South African Embassy closed down, with the apartheid government. They were gone.
Yeah.
So you see not just a slice of America, you see somewhat a slice of the world out there too.
Yeah. It sounds like Rock Creek Garden has a more international identity. Susan Davis kind of said the same thing. There's a lot more people from other countries. That sounds really wonderful. Did so you talk about you being the first person to bring okra. I mean, I think of okra as kind of a southern food. I mean, was that?
It is. It's very much a southern food and cuisine, but also Asians and Africans. And Southeast Asians grew a lot of okra as well. But people like Jim Pruce, who's from England, he says he loves it. He grows it a lot too, and other people grow it out there because it's an interesting plant.
Yeah. So you were there in a transition to the garden managing itself.
Right.
What do you remember of that process? I mean, not that bureaucracy is very interesting, but...
Well, I think I came in the year that they divested themselves. I was not there for the time before. I would not know anything about that, but I do recall that when we set up our own internal operations, we were pretty strict, in terms of the lines, and where your garden ended, and keeping the paths full of chips and the weeds down, and that was before you were able to put up fencing around it, and watching in terms of your chemicals and these things growing over to your neighbor's plot and things like that, and making sure the tools were all cleaned and lined up and the like.
Is there a tool shed, a communal?
We have a nice tool shed now.
Yeah.
And typically, when I was one to set up, we have our fall meeting. I forgot what date it is now. We used to have a fall meeting after closing. We used to have a spring meeting, which was the first Saturday in March. But they did away with the fall meeting a few years ago, found that they really didn't need it. when we closed down and moved things out. Well, anyway, we still had the first Saturday in March as our spring meeting out at the Nature Center. Out here. It's usually, people are ready. Some of them already have things in by that time, and there's a lot of happiness and good feeling when you get out there and turn over the first, or even put in your transplant, you brought from home, your lettuce or whatever.
Yeah.
Your cold crops and the like. Yeah.
You talked about setting up those rules, just around chemicals and boundary lines. How have those been enforced over the years?
Well, I think mostly by pressure. I don't think there's any real. I don't think put anybody out of the garden. People been put out for, weeds overgrowing.
Yeah.
Or pilfering. We've had
Yeah.
a few people who seem to be into that thing. And then when the deer population started exploding, they permitted us to put up fences. I was from the first group to put up a fence out there too.
Around the whole garden or around just your own plot?
My own plot.
Yeah.
The whole plot. And then the deer population has exploded.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a fence around it, you won't have a garden anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's the vibe at the garden? I mean, is it are people pretty connected to each other, or do you tend to spend a lot of time with other gardeners?
I think so. There's certain people come out at certain times, like Rita Mendez. Was Rita one of the people I can recommend to you? Okay.
Yeah.
Rita's there nearly every day, but that's Rita's style in terms of her. She rides a bicycle out there, and she gardens, goes home and prepares it, food for her family and the like, and so does some people. It's part of their lifestyle to be out there certain times, every day. Last few years, I've only been able to get out there maybe every 2 or 3 days. I try to get out there in the mornings before the sun really comes up, and that's the best time to water and also to see how things are going, and to transplant in the evenings.
Yeah. So over the years, people garden for different reasons. Some people it's just they grew up doing it. Some people need to do it for their budget. As time went on, why were you doing it, would you say?
I was doing it mostly for my own well-being, my psychological well-being. That's what I see it, because I get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and the term I use, it clears my head. Because gardening it's going to do its thing, regardless of you. They do things on its own terms, and it lets you know that Mother Nature's in charge, and not you. And still, there's a lot of enjoyment to see the bloom on an eggplant or on okra. They're beautiful blooms.
Yeah.
And to see things sprout, and to try to get rid of the Mexican bean beetles and the like, or the harlequin bugs. Who's gonna win out on that contest? Eventually, Mother Nature does it all itself. But those are the kinds of things I sort of see as a challenge, but also I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I recall years ago, I may have had to go out of town for some reason, maybe a site visit or whatever. My wife went out with one of my daughters, and she was saying whatever she did out there, they were able to do in half an hour. It would have taken me 2 hours. She said, that work would have taken you 2 hours. I said, you're right. I said, you saw it as work, and it's not work. You see it as work, you shouldn't be out there. You're not a gardener.
Yeah. So 2 hours would be fine for you to.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Sure it would be, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, whereas she wants to get in and out. But she didn't like to get out in the garden. That's not the thing for her.
Yeah. Had she grown up gardening at all, or?
No, but her family are farmers. And her mother left the farm. And we went back this past September. We went back to the homestead up. It's a suburb, a landkreis of Würzburg, and that's where 6 years ago I took the family of 11 of us from here and went back there. 27 cousins showed up for the gathering. most of them don't farm anymore, but they all have gardens, and some of them pretty extensive gardens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So your wife and your children, you said you had 2 daughters?
Two daughters, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were they participating in the gardening with you?
No, no, they don't garden.
Okay.
My wife would only go out. She'd go out occasionally and sit out there while I, if I promised I'd only be out for 15 or 20 minutes. First of all, she's fair complexion.
Yeah.
And the sun, she can't be out in the sun. And she's very delectable to insects and the like.
Okay.
So for those 2 reasons, she's not a gardener.
Yeah.
And this is just not her thing. She won't. She doesn't garden.
Yeah. And your daughters is
No, none of them garden.
Okay.
Neither. The 2 of them got into gardening. Yeah.
So what would you do with the food? Other than eat it. Were you?
Our neighbors
Okay.
and my church members.
Okay.
I usually take in bags and bags of produce to church every Sunday, and I distribute about 3 or 4 of my neighbors as well.
Okay.
Tomatoes, cucumbers.
And were you always doing that, just kind of distributing?
Oh yeah,
it?
Yes, I've always done that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you must have been popular.
Very much so, especially in harvest time. The church members. I have about 10 or 12 of them, and they're not all of them not of means, so they look forward to it. Yeah.
Okay.
And they like fresh vegetables.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Who are the other people? You've mentioned some people from the garden. Are there other people that stand out in your memory from the community garden, or people you learned things from, or people you taught to?
Well, I like to talk to some people like that.
Yeah.
Natasha Naughton I like to talk to. I like to talk to Rita Mendez, in terms of her garden. There was also a fellow out there who, Felder, Ali Felder, who was, he was in the, not the Peace Corps, but he was he was overseas a lot, through exchange, through the State Department, I guess he was. Interesting guy. He sort of left the garden this year for the first time. He's well in his 80s, and I think he'd become a little sloppy. And he has a garden at home too, and there was a lot of people criticizing him, so he just up and left. I talked to him every now and then.
Yeah. But other people, you took master gardening, so that you used kind of a formal educational course as a way of learning. What other ways have you used to just learn over the years?
I read, the newspapers, the Post has, Adrian Higgins, he has a good column there weekly. I listen often to the garden shows. Mostly not for gardening, but for my lawn. I have about 12,000 square feet of lawn.
Oh, wow.
And I cut that, and also the shrubs. I don't have any major flower garden thing around there, but the timing and things like that. So, I just listen, and see if something I can apply, to my lawn and the garden.
Yeah. What would you say? You talked about just kind of adapting to Mother Nature and learning how to just know what nature is doing. What would you say about gardening here in Washington, D.C., about what it takes?
It can be fun, but also you feel like you're making a contribution to the environment. I typically take all my leaves and shred them and take them out to the garden. And I'll stack them up or give them away to other gardeners out there. If I have time, I'll put them down, try to get them down right after Christmas, because there's a cherry tree out there, or maybe it's apple, but those type of trees, are very susceptible to disease. So I wait till those leaves have fallen, and I try to put these leaves down. Sometimes it's 6 or 12 inches high, and I'll put plastic over them, to sort of heat them up, or come out every now and then and turn them over, throw some lime down, or even occasionally I've taken some when you put bread together, and put that in a solution, put out there, and that helps break down the leaves and things like that. Yeah.
Did you
And-
compost? Are you a composter?
That is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
is
Do you compost food though, or?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't want to do that. We used to have a compost pile out there years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't maintained, turned as frequently, so we'd had a rodent problem out there for a long time, pretty bad. There are rodents out in the woods anyway. You're going to have rodents, but that was quite a nuisance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you found yourself teaching other people to garden very much, either
Yeah,
formally or informally?
I do. I think I'm looked upon sometimes. What I do now, when I plant this and the like, and I give advice to people out there in the garden on that. At one time, I tried to work with a friend who had a Boy Scout troop up at right up here on Alaska Avenue and Calmere Road. I went up there, and they started out and trying to get badges for gardening, but they didn't follow through.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 years ago, one of my friends, neighbors, a neighbor from the garden, had a son with an interest in garden. So I set aside a plot for him, and he carried on for much of the summer, but as summer went on, he learned that most of gardening is about weeding.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't weed, you're going to have So I let it overrun him so he could see what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next year he came back, but he didn't stay the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's keeping the weeds down. You can keep weeds down by many means, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean,
gave him
go
a key,
ahead.
but and he was within walking distance from here to about no more than 100 yards away where he lived.
Yeah. Would you say that? So that work, I mean, that comes up in these interviews a lot. That people just emphasizing that
Mm-hmm.
the work of gardening makes or breaks the gardener. New
Yeah.
gardeners. I mean, would you say that that's keeping new people from gardening, or in an urban environment like this?
Well, I think it does keep people from gardening. I think some people are not outdoors types. For my wife, for example, she's very susceptible to sun and heat and insect bites. You're going to stay away from that. And she's one of the people that is. She does. The other thing is, you want to exert yourself like that anytime, day or night, and some people don't.
Yeah.
And they don't see the some gain of gardening. And it's not just the produce. That's the least thing as far as I'm concerned. The most important thing is being out there and working with Mother Nature in tandem, or fighting Mother Nature on occasion, with the weeds and the other things, insects that appear from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's where I see it mostly in that context. And that's where I get my joy and satisfaction and peace of mind,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has that been your primary recreational activity over the years?
It has. It has been great, recreational activity. I don't know that I do any other thing on a regular basis as I do gardening or taking care of my lawn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So just being outside.
Yeah.
So after sleeping outside in the cold, you found your
Well,
sweet spot.
I can go in and get out and sleep in a nice warm bed or air-conditioned room at night. That's right.
Mm-hmm. At Rock Creek Community Garden, are there new generations of gardeners coming in?
Yeah, they are. There are quite a few. You see that, there are a lot of Latinos out there in the garden now.
Uh-huh.
That reflects, the mostly changing demographics of the city as well.
Yeah.
So that's reflected there as well.
Are they mostly immigrants themselves or first generation?
I believe most of them are. There is one Latino out there who, I know she's a professional. Her husband was a doctor, but she's been out there 20 more years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. What else haven't we talked about? I'm curious if you have any other thoughts about, gardening in DC, or how things have changed, or what you've seen over the years.
I've seen an increase in community gardens. You go along Blair Road, that garden is very active down there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I would stop there, but also that garden on 13th Street.
Mm-hmm.
I've stopped. I started there looking into possible garden before I was able to get a place at Rock Creek.
Mm-hmm. And were they full also?
They were full. They were
Yeah.
full. Yeah, yeah. Those are only two that I see in my regular comings and goings. There's some over in Northwest, that very active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you attribute that increase to anything in particular?
Well, I think it's more of a consciousness, of being aware of your environment and the need to work with Mother Nature rather than fight Mother Nature. And I think, you see that starting with some of the realizations that some of the chemicals we use, have negative effects, not just on frogs or insects, but on people as well.
Yeah. You're doing a project right now working with a lot of young people, high school students. Do you pass any of this on to them?
I haven't been gardening yet. Not yet. Just getting started down there at Dunbar, set up their roof garden. So when they get that underway, I probably will share with them, or at least try to volunteer in that area. But
so that's with the new building that they're
That's a
building?
new building,
They're going to
yes.
put a roof garden?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Are you part of that at all so far? Or?
No, I'm just with the Alumni Federation, but
Okay.
we are asking for volunteers in various categories, for now, to do tours of the building, to docents for the museum we have there, and also, of course, for teaching, mentoring, and tutoring type of things.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting.
Mhm.
Nice.
It is. Yeah.
Again, is there anything else you would add to your story as a gardener or as a Washingtonian?
I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah,
I really don't.
we have.
Nothing comes to mind right off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really
You're quite
appreciate
welcome,
it.
Dave. Yeah, I wish you luck on your project, and
Thank
I'm going
you.
to try to bring mine to a close next week with the students, and then we put things to bed in terms of going to production with these poster boards and the like.
Excellent.
Display. Yeah.
Okay.